It was loud, it was long, it was emotional, and both James and his business manager, Maverick Carter, told CNN last night they see an element of race underscoring a portion of the criticism James received.
Do you think there's a role that race plays in this?
I think so at times. It's always, you know, a race factor.
It definitely played a role in some of the stuff coming out of the media and things that were written, for sure.
And then this afternoon, an opportunity for Rachel Nichols to put that question one more time to LeBron James about the issue as he perceives it of race in the criticism he received around the decision.
How do you think race played a factor in the backlash against you?
I already stated that race, and you know, I'm not going to go back on my words and answer the question. I think people are looking too far into it, but at the same time, you know, sometimes it does play a part in it. But you know, I've said what I had to say, and I'll continue to move on.
So Maverick Carter with that statement, LeBron James as well. This dimension of the summer free agent chess game. Let's say good afternoon to Vincent Thomas of Slam Magazine at ESPN.com. Henry Abbott joins us on the telephone, ESPN.com's True Hoop, and we continue as well with Chris Broussard. Vincent wrote a very perceptive piece recently on .com. Let's put up what we would like to call the nut graph in journalism. It basically explains what his main point was, which is the more America shuns LeBron, the more Black America retreats to his corner. In fact, as America hates LeBron more and more, Black America's collective hug embraces LeBron tighter and tighter. It's called Black protectionism. Vincent, what's been the reaction to what you've written?
I think that there are some people who read what I wrote and automatically think that I'm saying for those that dislike LeBron, that they dislike LeBron for racist reasons. And although LeBron, as he said, you know, race is part of the reason why he's disliked, plays a role, is a factor. I don't think that the majority of the people that dislike LeBron dislike him because he's a black man or because of any hate that you can ascribe to racism. I think it's because of what they perceive to be egomania. The way race really plays a role in the perception of LeBron, I think, is more seen in Black America, where there's this protectionism, this reaction by a large portion of the Black community who sees LeBron taking widespread criticism to give him that collective hug and say, hold on, wait a second. Do we really need to dislike this guy this much for what he's done? And that's why you haven't seen a shift in negative opinion for LeBron within the Black community. It's more so shifted to neutral, whereas there's been a negative shift in opinion among non-Blacks in the country.
Henry, let me ask you where the line is between outrage at perhaps the way it was stage managed, the decision, and the entire carnival that surrounded his move to Miami, and going over the line to your mind into something that might have a racial component.
I think it's like a flex fuel. I talk about those flex fuel vehicles where they can run on any different kind of gas or whatever. I think the anti-LeBron tidal wave of commentary this summer runs on flex fuel, and there's egomania, as Vincent said. There's this kind of analysis that he's a beta dog or some kind of Benedict Arnold or that he's grandstanding. Those things are all fueling this, and then when Vincent wrote that story, we kind of got the notion that Black Americans weren't quite so upset about it. His negative Q rating was pretty normal in that group, which makes you think, like maybe we can legitimately add a racial component to this. So to me, I've been mystified and blown away all summer by the degree of hatred here, and this I think sheds a little light into it. And
the degree of hatred that you see where exactly?
What's that?
Exactly where do you see it?
Beginning the night of the decision, I spent my whole days and nights pretty much on the internet, and the commentary blew my mind. We were in Daily Dime Live on ESPN.com, and we had to approve the comments. 90% of them were unapprovable because they were just so unbelievably hateful and just unprintable. So that night I was like, wow. It's every day, every time I write about LeBron, you look at the comments on that post, and half of them are really just beyond the pale. And I think that's fascinating and interesting, and the more that we can understand that, the smarter we're going to be about race in America.
All right, Chris, help us here. Is it what LeBron did, how he did it? Where do you parse this issue?
Well, LeBron could have handled it better. There's no question about that. But no matter how he did it, I think the reaction would have been, at least in Cleveland, would have been largely the same. You know, they would have been hated him. And African Americans, at least many that I've talked to, and the way I feel, they looked at it like, you know, it's one thing to be disappointed, it's one thing to be hurt, it's one thing to even be angry. But when you saw people burning LeBron James jerseys, when you saw people defacing, you know, LeBron James posters and things that were hanging in Cleveland on walls, and then the reaction from the owner, Dan Gilbert, it looked like it went beyond, you know, just being angry, and really were attacks on his character. He's a coward. He's a bum. What Henry suggested, 90% of the things were unprintable. That's when African Americans thought it was race, and what Maverick Carter was referring to in terms of things that were written. It was a lot talked about how LeBron James is an egomaniac, and this is the summer of LeBron, and he's just basking in his ego and all this. But when I think LeBron James, he showed a lot less ego than Brett Favre has. They both have done things, you know, that were egotistical, but Brett Favre has been far more egotistical, in my opinion, than what LeBron James did. But it's kind of laughed off, oh, Brett's being Brett. But when LeBron does something half as bad, he's vilified for it. And so that's, I think, what people like Maverick Carter and others are referring to.
Vincent, what element is there to the point that here you've got players, young African Americans, extremely affluent, in their mid to late 20s, basically calling the shots? I mean, their God-given right to be capitalist, moving the chess pieces themselves, moving together. They can do it legally. They're not colluding. They're allowed to do it. How much do you think that might fuel some of this?
You know, I was watching SportsCenter earlier today, and Jalen Rose said something that I thought was perceptive, where with athletes in America, there's always this underlying sort of shut up and play mentality that comes from the fans and the American public at large. And when you have these athletes that are asserting their individuality and their, you know, entrepreneurship, that can be taken the wrong way from the American public. But I would like to touch on the Brett Favre issue. Interestingly enough, when I was doing the research for the LeBron piece, I also asked what the Q scores were for Brett Favre. And within the African American community, the negative Q rating for Brett Favre was in the teens, you know, right around where it was for LeBron. And actually there was a larger percentage of non-blacks that disliked Brett Favre. And what it makes me think is that perhaps, and you hate to generalize because that's dangerous terrain, but perhaps there is less moral judgment or less of a rush to moral judgment from the black community when it comes to athletes, because athletes have always taken on such an inspirational type of place in the community, and that's why you don't see them rushing to judgment when
going back to the age of Joe Louis and certainly Jackie Robinson for All-Americans. Vincent Thomas, Henry Abbott, Chris Broussard. Wish we had more time. Fascinating. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
From the Watch and Listen tab on ESPN.com. Navigate to the ESPN.com page to send us email and to sign up for our daily program alert. You can also view past OTL features here. We will be right back.
Outside the Lines First Report, brought to you by Michelin, a better way forward.
There once was a hungry road that wouldn't let drivers